For this morning's gospel reading, I've stitched together three passages, one from John's Gospel, one from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, and one from the Gospel of Luke, because they illustrate the topic of my homily this morning. From John: "Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God. Believe in me as well. In my Father's house there are many mansions. If it were not so, would I have told you that I am going to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and welcome you into my presence, so that you also may be where I am." And from 1 Corinthians: "It is written, what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, and what no human mind has conceived, these things God has prepared for those who love him." And from Luke: "Once, on being asked by the Pharisees when the kingdom of God would come, Jesus replied, 'The coming of the kingdom of God is not something that can be observed, nor will people say, here it is, or there it is, because the kingdom of God is within you and among you.'" Words inspired by God. I want you to really stretch your imaginations for a few moments. I want you to imagine that you've lived all your life in one huge big room in which there are no doors or windows. You've never been outside this room. And in fact, everybody you've ever known has lived in this room. Your parents were born and lived here. Your grandparents were born and died here. Every human being lives inside in this room or lived inside in this room. And there's no way of understanding what might be outside this room. And in this room, there are no animals of any kind. There's no domesticated animals, and there are no wild animals. And you've lived all your life, as have your forebears, in this room, just dealing with what this room contains. And you have no idea what's outside the walls. Nobody has ever managed to perforate the walls and find out what's on the other side of it. But on one wall, there's a peculiar machine. And there's a button on it, and when you press the button, it dispenses minced meat. And you have to try to figure out what's creating the minced meat, what's on the other side of this wall. And you have no idea what's on the other side of this wall. So your senses are able to tell you one thing. So minced meat comes out when you press the button. So you have to presume that the other side of the wall contains just these massive amounts of minced meat. And when you press the button, it disgorges some of it into the interior. But other than that, you have no idea what's outside. Well, that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about how we know what we know. In philosophy, this is called epistemology. How do people know what they know? And I'm going to make 4 main points this morning. The first one I would call is called the myth of the given. The second one I would call it the reality-making machine. The third one I call the falling tree. And then the fourth one, the ultimate level. So the first one, the myth of the given. So you're inside in this room, all of your life inside in this room, and your sensorium is allowing you to perceive the minced meat. But it is not allowing you to see what's outside. Now what's outside actually is, there's a cow factory outside. And there's a very rich man who has millions of cows. And every so often, he drives a cow up to the other side of the machine, pushes it through, it chops it up into pieces, mangles it completely, and creates minced meat out of it on the other side. But you don't know any of that. All you see is the minced meat. So your senses can detect the minced meat, but it can't detect the cow or describe it. It's never heard of such a thing. So it can neither infer its existence nor describe what it might look like. So once you get the minced meat, you cook it and you eat it. So cooking it is like your perception. There's a difference between the senses and your perception. Once you drink in data, your brain has to operate on that in order to create some kind of a reality model. So this big room, as you've guessed already, is the cosmos. And nobody has ever been outside the cosmos. There's one great picture, I forget who painted it, of a guy with his head stuck out through the wall. Do you remember that? Have you seen that one? It's like a picture of the sky, a dome of the sky, and there's a guy inside, and he's managed to stick his head out through, and he's wondering what's outside in it. None of you ever seen that? It's a famous painting. Yeah, okay. Well, that never happened. Nobody ever stuck their head out through the cosmos and found what's at the other side. So this great room in which we live, and in which all your forebears have ever lived in, is this cosmos. And there's never been anybody outside it to tell us what's on the other side. So we're trying to infer from the mince, what's on the other side. And mostly we're coming up with the notion that somehow it's just more mincemeat. It's mincemeat all the ways down. So that's in some senses what's delivered to us. Now, in some senses, if there's some unmangled reality outside of the chopper or the mangler, we can't get in contact with it. All we have is evidence of the mincemeat. We have no idea what's on the other side. And there's a philosophical fallacy then, which is called the myth of the given. And the myth of the given is the belief system that our senses are able to deliver a very accurate one-to-one mapping of what's out there. So that what our senses record actually is an accurate description of what's out there. That's called the myth of the given. That's totally made up. There's absolutely no way we can prove that to be true. If our senses could deliver us the cow instead of just the minced meat, then animals would have much more accurate maps of the cosmos than we do. And so, for instance, let's say a dragonfly. A dragonfly has 2 eyes, and it has 2,700 facets in each of its 2 eyes. So imagine what the visual impression a dragonfly has when he flies over a field of flowers. So his map of the visual reality is a much richer one than yours or mine. Or you take a bat. A bat can hear up to 100,000 cycles per second. So a bat has a much better acoustical representation of the universe than you do or I do. Now you take a bloodhound. A bloodhound can deter an odor to 1 part in several trillion molecules. So if you could somehow cross-fertilize or interbreed a bat, a bloodhound, and a dragonfly, let's call it, what are we going to call it? A fly-bat hound. They would have a much, much better, map of the cosmos than you would or I would. So that's the problem. The myth of the given is the presumption that our sensorium actually delivers to us accurate maps of what's out there. We have no idea what's out there. We're dealing with minced meat. We have no idea of cow at that stage. So that's the first point. The second point then I call the reality-making machine. So initially, our senses, whether it's the eyes or the ears or smell or whatever, they're drinking in data from someplace. The data are flowing through. But the data don't lead to experiences immediately. The data have to be processed, and we call that process perception. So perception is what the brain does with the data that the senses deliver to us. It's like you take the minced meat, and now you got to put it on the stove, and you got to cook it on the stove. And the cooking is what creates perception. So then perception leads to experience. Your eyes do not give you an experience. Your ears do not give you an experience. They give you raw data, which your brain translates through perception and then gives you an experience. The experience comes at the end of the perception. So now you have an experience. You put together a whole bunch of experiences, and that helps you to create your model of reality. But there are problems at every stage of the process. There are problems at the level of the senses, because sometimes senses malfunction or don't work at all. You take somebody like Helen Keller, and so she could see nothing or hear anything. And so her ability to drink in data is completely compromised. The same thing with ordinary human beings. Your range of vision is between infrared and ultraviolet, between 400 and 700 nanometers. Outside of those, you can't see anything. And so you've got a very, very narrow range. So this range restricts very much what we can see. Now, the same thing is true of all the other senses. So our reality operation then can be faulty at any one of these levels. When you get to the level, for instance, of perception, so it's like you're cooking the data of your senses. It's in a pot. But depending on how you cook it or what you put in there with it, if there's 40 more ingredients in there, it's going to change the taste completely. So what are the other ingredients? What you're being told, what you learned in school, what science is telling you, what religion is telling you, previous experiences, your fears, your hopes, your dreams, your expectations. They're all the other ingredients that go into the pot. And so you're boiling this. So are you going to boil it? Are you going to fry it? Are you going to barbecue it? Are you going to do it over gas? Are you going to do it with electricity? Are you going to do it over an open fire and on a barbecue? All these things will change what the final taste is going to look like. So your experience is going to be very, very different depending on the input, the minced meat itself, and on the other ingredients you put in with it, and the way in which you cook it. So experiences are all over the map. And therefore, our models of reality are totally different. Our models of reality depend upon this. So we create our models of reality then by the ways in which we cook this food. So, for instance, once a culture has indoctrinated us, it's very difficult to experience that which the culture says does not exist. There's a famous story told about when Columbus first landed in the Americas and his ships began to approach the first shore. The local population could see the waves rippling in, but they couldn't see the ships because it was so totally outside their experience. Even though they should have been visible, these huge big ships on the horizon, they couldn't see any of them. Only the shaman could infer from the ripples that there must be some kind of a very big canoe causing these ripples. And finally, at some stage, they managed to see it. But they couldn't see it because the culture would tell them it didn't exist. There couldn't be anything as big as this. So they couldn't see it originally. So if the culture says it doesn't exist, it becomes very, very difficult to actually experience it. But we do manage to have sometimes we have experiences that bring us outside the norm. And in my experience, there are three kinds of experiences that we have. There are experiences which I call confirmatory, that they say, yeah, that's exactly what you were taught is exactly right. Or there are experiences which are really disturbing, or there is experiences which are really liberating. So what would be a confirmatory experience? So if you learn science in school, and you learned a little bit about astronomy, and you learn that the Earth is actually tilted on its axis. If you look at the plane of the ecliptic, it's like a disk around which the 9 planets are circulating the sun. It's almost like a flat disk, and they're all going around in this plane. But the Earth's axis is tilted at 23 degrees. So it's not upright as it goes around the sun. It's tilted at 23 degrees as it goes around the sun, which creates summer and winter and autumn and spring, stuff like this. So you learn this in school. Now suppose you live by the ocean, and every single day you sit on the beach on the exactly the same spot, and you watch where the sun goes down, starting on the 21st of June. And you look at it all the way to the 21st of December. You'll find two things. You'll find that the sun sets further and further to the south, day by day, and you'll find that it goes down 1 minute earlier every day. And if you sit there from December 21st to June 21st, you'll find that every single day, you're sitting in the same spot, the sun is going to set at its place which is a little bit further north each day, and it's going to set a minute later each day. So you can verify this for yourself. So that would be an experience, would be confirmatory. It's confirming what you learned in your science classes. What about an experience that would be really disturbing? What if you woke up to the realization, as somebody said famously one time, we have found the enemy, and the enemy is us. If we realize, for instance, that we're part of a country at the moment which has 800 military bases in 130 countries in the world, and they're not serving America, they're not serving you or me, even though they're taking our tax dollars, they're serving 5 big corporations who are extracting various commodities in these places. That would be a very, very disturbing experience. That would shatter what conventional media are telling you. What about a liberating experience? Suppose, for instance, that you were raised in an atheist family. Nobody ever went to church. When the subject of God was mentioned, everybody laughed. And then someday, for whatever reason, you're sitting minding your own business, watching the sunset, and you have this mystical experience of unity consciousness, and you know without a shadow of a doubt that there is a God. There is a creator behind all of this. So that would be an extraordinary, liberating experience. So that's how experiences then generate our reality models. That would be my second point. The third point I want to make then, I call it the falling tree. You've all heard the famous conundrum. If a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody there to hear it, does it make noise? And the answer is, it doesn't. Scientifically, it does not make noise. What happens is, a tree falls in the forest, it creates shock waves, which result in vibrations of the air. And if there's a human being nearby, and if those vibrations fall within a very narrow band, the ear will translate it as sound. If it's outside that band, if it's higher frequency or lower frequency, the ear will not even hear it, so it won't translate it at all as sound. So it'll be totally silent. So you say, well, there's other animals hearing it. Good, it's true. But all the other animals are doing the same thing. Each animal has a particular frequency band, and if the air vibrations are within that band, that animal will interpret it as sound as well. But if it's outside that band, higher or lower, no animal on earth will hear it. And so depending upon the instruments that are translating the air vibrations, it's not that there is sound, it's that there are shock waves creating air vibrations which the ear in particular frequencies, in a particular band, will translate or interpret or represent as sound. So now, if the tree falls in the forest and there's nobody there to hear it, it does not make a sound. So where does that leave us with our reality models? It seems to me then that our sensorium and our perceptual processes, are like great reducing valves. That they take whatever is out there, about which we can say nothing, but they take those phenomena from the outside and they reduce them down into a format that's perceivable by the human sensorium and the human brain. Now, science thinks it's found the answer. Science tells us we know that there is a reducing valve and we know exactly what's on the other side. We can tell you what the cow is. They think they can tell us what the cow is. And they think that it's basically some form of wavelength, whether it's light waves or electromagnetic activity or acoustical waves or whatever, and that basically all these can be represented in Boolean algebra. You can break it all down to zeros and ones. And so that ultimately science is convinced that we live in some kind of a simulated universe, like a computer program based on Boolean algebra. And once you just get rid of the reducer of the sensorium and the human brain, you found the ultimate reality. And the ultimate reality is waves and numbers, zeros and ones. Now, what if science is just another valve? What if science is just another one of those reducers? What if there's an infinite number of reducers and valves all the way up to the top? How will we ever get to figure out, what's real here? So, if there's valves all the way up, what's the ultimate reality? How do we get up to the top of this valve? So perhaps there are higher and higher levels of reality. Each valve is opening up. If it's a two-way valve and we manage to know how to navigate it, we can go back through the valve and access more pristine levels of reality than the one in which we find ourselves with science or with the sensorium. So are there any hints about that? I want to point out two hints this morning. The first one is the Hindu model of the 7 bodies. According to Hinduism, we actually have 7 different bodies. There's the physical body, which is vibrating at a very dense frequency, very slow, 400 to 700 nanometers. And then above that, there's the etheric body, vibrating at a higher frequency, like your aura. And then there's the astral body, vibrating at a still higher frequency. And then there's the mental body, Plato's ideal realm. And then there's the causal body, where we're psychic. And then there's the soul body, Atman. And then finally there's Brahman, cosmic consciousness. So in the Hindu model, in a sense, there are at least 7 different levels of reality, and the chakras are like the reducing valves that step down the intensity from one level down to the other. Or if you know how to navigate it and raise the kundalini, you go back up through the process so that you can inhabit the highest levels of all. So that's one model. Another one is, the reason I chose the first reading this morning, when Jesus says, "In my Father's house there are many mansions." Now, I played around with this morning just for the fun of it. So is this what Jesus was saying? Did he say, there's a special mansion in heaven for the Pentecostals, and it's soundproofed, and it's kind of away from everybody else, so we have insulation there because they're a really noisy bunch. They're always singing in tongues and whatever, so we don't want to disturb everybody else. So the Pentecostals have their mansion kind of a distant place. And then there's the Catholics. The Catholics have a mansion, and it's in a very remote area, because Catholics believe there's nobody else in heaven except themselves. So we don't want to kind of upset them by seeing evidence for the presence of others up there. So we put them in a remote location. And then there's the Jews. And the Jews have to have the mansion right next to God's one, because they believe they're God's chosen people, and God doesn't want to upset them. And then there's the Hindus. And the Hindus have to live near an airport, because since they believe in reincarnation, there's going to be a lot of coming and going from heaven. So they need access to an airport on a regular basis. And then there's a huge big mansion dedicated to the Muslims of the world, because not only are they very numerous, but a martyr is going to have 72 virgins. So if there's lots of martyrs, they've got a lot of space for 72 virgins each. And so they have to have a really, really big mansion. So I was just playing around with that image. Is that what Jesus meant by, "In my Father's house there are many mansions"? Obviously not. What I think he may be pointing at was that In my Father's house, there's access to many, many different valves, the reducing or the magnifying valves. And it only depends on your level of enlightenment which valve you can go through and which level of heaven you can attain. And so that for me would be an interpretation of this text this morning. This brings me to my final point. I call it the ultimate level. Is there an ultimate level? Or is it, reducing or amplifying valves all the way up and all the way down? Is there some place you can get to which is a final state? And I imagine there is. And this is why I chose the second reading this morning. When Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9, when he says, "Eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor has it even entered into the human mind what things God has created for those who love him." It is in fact Paul pointing to that level of reality, a level of reality which is way beyond the sensorium. Eyes can't see it, ears can't hear it, and even science can't figure it out. It's not even in the mind of the human, Paul says. So that the mind can't get you there, science can't get you there, and the sensorium cannot get you there. What things God has prepared for those who love him. So what would that look like? I believe that final stage would have three great qualities. The first great quality would be unconditional love. The second great quality would be unity consciousness. And the third great quality would be pure awareness. So let me just flesh those out for a moment. So the first great quality of that final stage, it seems to me, would be unconditional love. A place in which all of your fears dissolve. There's no place possible that fear could continue, or that anger could survive, or that prejudice could thrive. It's totally impossible. They would get totally dissolved in this unconditional love. And the second thing would be unity consciousness. All sense of separate self would dissolve. There'd be no personal identity. The ego would be long since gone. But even the notion of an individualized soul separated from other souls who are separated from God, that would dissolve. There'd be no difference between the observers. There'd be no difference between the participants. There'd be no difference between God and souls. It would be dissolved completely. And so when Christ says famously, which was the third reading I put in there this morning in Luke's Gospel, the kingdom of God isn't something you can point at and say it's over there, or it's here, or here's how you find it. He said, using a Greek phrase, Luke says, the kingdom of God is en mesoi. And Greek en mesoi means within you and among you. And so at that stage, with unity consciousness, the kingdom, in fact, is all there is. There is no longer a me to have it within or an us to have it among. It dissolves completely. And the third great quality then for me would be pure awareness. That not only is the difference or the separation between observers nullified, but there is no separation between the observer and the observed. There is no separation between the witness and what's being witnessed. There's only the process of observing and witnessing. There's only pure awareness. And that for me would be the original state and the final state when we get back there. And from that extraordinary unbroken bliss, God decided to play a game. And Hinduism calls this game Laila. It's the game of God. I call it God playing hide and go seek with herself, creating all of these illusions, all of these detours, all of these distractions in order to make it an adventure. It's like little kids sitting around a campfire in the dark, 9 and 10-year-old kids. And what's the first thing they're going to do when they sit around the campfire at night? They're going to tell ghost stories. They're going to encourage each other to tell ghost stories. They're going to be scared, absolutely scared, but they can't not do it. And they're going to tell ghost stories that they're shivering and they're afraid to go back to their tents. They have to do it. So this extraordinary dream of God's which we inhabit, we turn into nightmares occasionally by the ways in which we perceive it. But that's part of what we signed up for. We wanted to be frightened. We wanted to have an adventure so that we could rush back at the end of the week, and here's Mommy and Daddy, and we rush into their arms and say, I never want to leave home again. It was really scary out in the forest there. There was this creature with big red eyes. And we go home and we rest in the bosom of Daddy and Mommy. That's how we set out, every single one of us. And the trick is to somehow become lucid during the dream. This is God's dream. And the fact that it's a dream does not mean it's not real. The dream is maybe the second most pristine level of reality before the final unity consciousness. So, but we can inhabit that dream as a nightmare, or we can inhabit it lucidly. We can realize this is a drama that's God is putting on for the evolution of souls back to source. And when we do that, we take part in the dream, and the dream becomes an adventure. And then at some stage, we sneak up behind God and we grab God by the shoulder and say, "Gotcha!" Only to realize that the shoulders we're grabbing are our own.